We weren't really hiking that trip, more like car camping, but not the kind you do in a KOA site next to a trailer and a grill. I'm talking about deep BLM land in Colorado. No rangers, no marked campsites, no outhouses, just wilderness. Miles and miles of nothing but dirt roads, old trees, scattered patches of clearing, and the occasional skeleton of a deer picked apart by mountain lions or time. We drove an hour and a half down a Forest Service road that twisted through the hills south of Gypsum. A couple turns were washed out so badly we had to get out and stack rocks just to pass through. We didn't see a single other soul on the way in. Not one parked truck, not one hiker crossing the road, not a sound of an ATV, not the glow of a fire. It was empty, which is what we wanted. That kind of quiet is rare. There were 3 cars between us, me in my Subaru, my friend James in his 4Runner, and Kelly in her old Tacoma. 8 of us total. 5 girls, 3 guys. We'd been doing these trips together for years. We brought enough food to feed a small army and packed light on everything else. Tents, water containers, firewood, coolers, a gun or 2 just in case. There's bear country, and then there's people who don't like strangers country. Colorado has both. We set up in a clearing maybe 100 yards off the road. You couldn't even see the trail from where we were, but you could see anything driving on it. There was a stretch with no trees about a half-mile away that gave you a perfect window. If headlights came through, you'd know long before they got close. The idea was that this would give us peace of mind. If someone came down that road, we'd see it, hear it too. The trees out there absorb some noise, but car tires on that kind of gravel aren't subtle. Everything echoes. We set up a small fire pit with rocks and had dinner just as the sun dipped below the ridge. We were sitting on camp chairs, passing around a flask and poking at the coals, when I realized how far removed we really were. The only thing lighting the space was the fire. Our lanterns were all off. I turned one on for a second to dig through my backpack, and it was like turning on a spotlight in a cave. Complete darkness beyond our little ring of visibility. No moon that night, just clouds moving fast across a starless sky. Wind in the tree canopy, but dead still at ground level. The air felt heavy. I remember thinking it was too quiet. No crickets, no owls. Just the soft crack of burning wood and the hum of Wind Up High. Around 9:30, we started winding down. A couple of the girls went off to brush their teeth, and the rest of us cleaned up dinner, packed everything into bins and stowed it in the truck beds. Nobody wanted to leave food out and wake up to a black bear tearing through our coolers. I walked over to the Subaru to grab my jacket and noticed something right away. The front right tire looked low. Not flat exactly, but sunken. I crouched to check it and felt my stomach drop. It wasn't low. It was slashed. A clean cut, about 3 inches long, right in the sidewall. Sharp, straight, no fraying. It didn't look like a puncture from a rock or a nail. It looked deliberate. I stood up fast and looked at the other 2 vehicles. James's 4Runner and Kelly's Tacoma were parked next to mine, about 30 yards from the tents and fire. Both had the same thing, front right tire slashed. Clean cuts, same spot. I didn't yell. I just turned and walked straight back to the fire, heart hammering, legs cold all of a sudden. Everyone's mood shifted instantly when I told them. We walked together, checking each car. Same damage. 3 cars, 3 front right tires, all cut in almost exactly the same way. Nobody said it, but we all knew what that meant. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't something we missed on the way in. This was someone out here with us, close enough to slash our tires, and silent enough to do it without getting noticed. It was pitch dark by then, but the wind was still high in the trees. We must have missed the sound. Maybe they timed it with the wind, or maybe they were just that quiet. That moment, the one where we all stood around the cars, flashlights sweeping in all directions, hands shaking. It was the most afraid I've ever been in my life. My mouth was dry, my knees weak. I felt sick. Nobody moved. We were all staring at the trees, expecting something, anything, to come out of the shadows. We started whispering, like even that might give us away. We had no idea if the person was still nearby, watching, waiting. Maybe they were gone, or maybe they were 50 feet away, tucked between tree trunks, listening to every word. We didn't talk about it, we just acted. James always carried. He had a Glock in his bag and he moved to grab it. I was already getting the jack out of the back of my car. We all had spares, thank God, even if they were donuts. And we worked fast. 3 people jacking up cars. 3 more holding flashlights. 1 guy posted with the gun, scanning the trees with the red beam of a headlamp, stepping in slow circles. I remember hearing my own breath. I remember the sound of the tire iron against the lug nuts being painfully loud. No one said a single word during those 20 minutes. That was the worst part. The silence. Just our tools, the wind, the creak of pine trunks, and the creeping sense that we were being watched. We didn't know if it had been one person or more. Didn't know if they were still there. But it didn't matter. We had to move. As soon as the 3rd donut was on, we piled into the cars without even folding up the tents. Left the chairs. Left the firewood. Left 2 coolers full of food. Left everything. We just wanted to put distance between us and that place. My donut was already wobbly by the time we hit the forest road, but I didn't care. We drove, slow at first, then faster than we should have, headlights bouncing wildly over dips and rocks. We didn't stop until we were back on the paved road. An hour later, all of us shaking and too afraid to even step out to use the bathroom. Still no cell service. We kept driving until we got to a little town with a gas station and a sheriff's substation. It was past midnight, but we waited. Called the cops when we finally got signal, gave them GPS coordinates, told them what happened. They didn't sound surprised, just said to be careful out there. Told us to file a report if we wanted, but admitted there wasn't much they could do. We didn't go back for our stuff. We cut our trip short and drove home the next day. My hands didn't stop shaking until I was halfway down the highway. That sick feeling stayed in my gut for days. Weeks later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not the damaged tires are cheap. It was the idea of someone creeping around in the dark, 30 yards from where we were laughing, eating, living in that moment like the world was safe. Somebody was out there. Somebody had been watching us. They knew exactly when we'd be distracted. They knew to go for the front right tire. Same on all 3 vehicles. That's not random. That's intent. That's planning. What would have happened if we hadn't had spares? Or if one of us had walked back to the cars just 5 minutes earlier? Or if we'd stayed another night? I haven't camped out there since. I still go out into the wild, but I stay closer to the road now. And I always check the tires before sunset. I sleep with a knife under my sleeping bag, even when I'm just with friends. It's been years since that night, but the nightmares still come. Always the same dream. I'm kneeling beside my car, looking at the tire, and I feel it again, that weight of being watched. I turn around, and the forest is staring back. And there's never anyone there, but I know they were. I'll always know they were. It started like any other solo hike I'd done before. I wasn't deep in the Rockies or wandering off into grizzly territory. I was just out for a long day hike in a stretch of forested hills not far from where I lived. Central Oregon, dry pine woods, good elevation gain, long switchbacks. The kind of place where you might see a deer or maybe a black bear way off if you were unlucky. But nothing too wild. No permits required. A lot of trail runners used the area, and there were plenty of markers and cairns if you knew where to look. I had the day off and needed to clear my head, so I picked a lesser-used trail I'd only done once before. Not a dangerous one, just long, about 12 miles out and back. Midweek, early fall. Leaves starting to dry and drop, and the air just cool enough to keep me from overheating. I packed light, just a small day pack with water, a little food, a knife, my headlamp, and a power bank for my phone. I always kept it on airplane mode to save battery. Reception was spotty out there anyway. The first few miles were uneventful. I passed one other car at the trailhead, a dusty SUV with a bunch of stickers on the back window, and didn't think much of it. I signed in at the trail register like I always do and set off. Within 20 minutes, I was in the rhythm. That sort of calm that settles in when it's just your footsteps, your breath, the wind through the trees. I kept a steady pace, stopping only now and then to sip water or adjust my footing over the occasional downed log. At around mile 5, I came to a clearing where the trees opened up and the trail cut across a small, exposed slope. That's when I first noticed something strange. About 30 yards off trail, on a patch of sunlit dirt near a large boulder, I saw what I thought was a person lying flat on the ground. They weren't moving, and at first I figured it was just another hiker taking a break. Maybe someone had gone off trail to stretch or nap. They were half in the shade, but I could see the vague outline of a body, arms flat to the side, legs extended face down. Something about it felt off. I slowed my pace, kept moving, but glanced that way every few steps. No movement at all, not even a twitch. I kept going, but the image stayed in my mind. It wasn't until about 10 minutes later that something clicked. I stopped in the middle of the trail and pulled out my phone. I typed in one word, ghillie suit. The pictures that came up gave me a cold chill right through my chest. That body hadn't looked like someone napping. It had been too flat, too still. The outline was wrong. No backpack, no gear, no hat or shoes that I could make out. Just this lumpy, vague human shape that had looked like it was wearing moss. And now I was thinking about it again. I realized it hadn't been next to the boulder. It had blended into it, like part of the landscape. I stood there a long time, staring back in the direction I'd come. The trees were thick, and I couldn't see back to the clearing. I felt stupid. Maybe it had just been a guy resting. But ghillie suits aren't just some Halloween costume. They're made to blend you into your environment. For hunting, for military use, or worse. I didn't want to overreact, but I also didn't want to ignore my gut. I decided to keep moving. My plan had been to go to the end of the trail and turn around, but now I wasn't so sure. The farther I went, the farther I'd be from the trailhead. And the only person I'd passed was parked back there. I started paying closer attention to everything around me. Small signs, broken branches, prints in the dirt. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but the trees felt different now. The air felt tighter. I stopped enjoying the hike. Every sound made my skin twitch. After another mile or so, I turned around. I didn't want to be out there any longer than I needed to be. I walked fast. I wasn't running. I didn't want to make noise, but my legs were moving quick, and I kept scanning the trees to the sides of the trail, the ridge above me, the low gullies below. Then, about halfway back to the trailhead, I stopped cold. Right there in the dirt, just a few feet off the trail, was a boot print. Fresh, not mine. The tread was different, wider, like a hunting boot. It was pressed into a soft patch of ground next to a bush that had just started to turn yellow. And next to it, not even a full step away, was another, leading toward the trail, then stopping. I looked around. Nothing moved. I stood still for a long time, then slowly moved on, forcing myself not to look over my shoulder too often. I didn't want to spook myself, but the feeling in my gut had gone from, "This is weird," to full-on dread, like the kind that makes your stomach go hollow. I made it to the clearing again, the one where I'd seen the shape. I slowed to a crawl, stepping quietly now, eyes wide, scanning everything. The boulder was still there, the same patch of dirt, but nothing else. Just empty space where the body had been. I didn't stop walking. I kept going, faster now, eyes darting left and right. My ears were tuned in to every rustle, every branch creak. The worst part was not knowing how close they had been. If it really was someone in a ghillie suit, they could have been lying there for hours, watching. Maybe they saw me notice them. Maybe they moved as soon as I passed. Maybe they'd been following me the whole way since. The last mile was the longest of my life. I didn't see anything, but that didn't make me feel better. Every time I thought I heard a footstep behind me, I stopped and listened. Nothing, just wind. But wind can hide a lot. When I finally saw the roof of my car through the trees, I felt a wave of relief, but also panic. Because what if they'd gotten ahead of me? What if they were waiting at the trailhead? I slowed down again and approached from the side, circling around through the brush instead of walking straight down the trail. I peeked out from behind a tree and scanned the lot. My car was untouched. The SUV was still there too, still dusty, but something had changed. There were boot prints in the dust on the back of the SUV. Fresh, clear, like someone had leaned against it, looked in through the windows. then stepped back. I crept forward and checked my own car. All good. I unlocked it and got inside, locked the doors immediately, and just sat there, heart pounding. The last thing I wanted to do was get out and check the woods. So I didn't. I started the engine, backed out slowly, and drove down the gravel road, watching the trees. About 10 minutes later, still shaking, I finally got a single bar of reception. I pulled over, took a deep breath, and called the local ranger station. Gave them the trail name, told them what I saw, and said I thought someone was out there in a ghillie suit, possibly hunting people or at the very least behaving extremely suspiciously. The ranger sounded calm, but I could tell he was concerned. He thanked me and said they'd send someone out to check it. I gave them my contact info and hung up. I drove home in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of the road and the image of that body burned into my head. Not a body, I kept reminding myself. Person. Alive. Choosing to lay there in full camo, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in my house made me flinch. Every shadow in the hallway looked too still. I locked every door and window twice. I didn't even shower. Just sat there, scrolling through images of ghillie suits, reading about how they're used. Some for photography, some for bird watching, most for military snipers and hunters. But this wasn't a photographer. No camera, no sign of gear, just a man lying in the dirt, not moving, watching a trail. A week later, I got a call back from the ranger station. They'd gone out to the trail, found the SUV still parked there. Same plates, same stickers, but it had been abandoned. No sign of the driver, no camp nearby, just the vehicle. They called it in, ran the plates. Apparently it belonged to a man who was already on a list, a person of interest in several other backcountry incidents. Nothing they could pin him for, just patterns, reports of strange behavior, missing hikers, gear found off-trail. They towed the vehicle. That was the last update I got. They said they'd alert nearby rangers and law enforcement, but without a name and without a crime, there wasn't much more they could do. It's been months since then. I haven't gone back. I still hike, but never alone now, and never in that area. Sometimes I think about that moment, when I looked over and thought it was just a guy lying down, just a body in the dirt. But it wasn't. It was someone hiding in plain sight, someone watching, someone who didn't want to be seen. And I wonder, how many others walked by and never noticed? How many others didn't turn around? That thought keeps me up some nights. Not the danger, not the fear. The idea that I almost didn't look up what a ghillie suit was. The idea that next time I might not notice at all. I'm from Australia, and I know people say everything here wants to kill you. Snakes, spiders, jellyfish, whatever. But the one thing I've always been glad we don't have is big cats. No cougars, no mountain lions. That kind of predator scares the absolute hell out of me. Something that can stalk you for hours, silently, and then come at you like a whisper on the wind. You never hear them until it's too late. Give me a snake or a spider any day. At least they don't think. A few years ago, I flew to the US for a month to visit a couple of old mates who had moved out to Washington State. Beautiful place. Huge green forests, misty valleys, lakes that stretch on forever. We planned a short trip into the Cascades. Not too deep, but far enough that we'd be away from roads and cell towers for a couple of days. Just a few guys with packs, hammocks, and some borrowed gear. We weren't bushwalking experts, but we knew how to manage ourselves. The second night in, we set up camp just above a river bend, maybe 10 miles from the trailhead. Thick pine all around us, fog rolling low through the trees. It was peaceful, eerily quiet sometimes. We'd made good time during the day, had a fire going, and were in good spirits. They were drinking and joking around, and I wandered off to get some air. Needed to stretch my legs, be alone with my thoughts for a while. I walked maybe a few hundred meters from camp, following a small game trail uphill through the trees. There was no wind, just the stillness in the forest that made every snap of a twig feel loud. I stopped on a small ridge overlooking the river and stood there for a while, just breathing, letting it all soak in. That's when I first felt it. You know that feeling you get when someone's staring at you? like a tickle at the back of your neck, almost instinct. I turned slowly, but there was nothing, just trees, fog, and the dark pushing in between the trunks. I shook it off and started walking back toward camp. That's when I saw it. It was quick, just a shape moving across the trail, maybe 50 meters ahead of me. Smooth, silent, low to the ground, a flash of pale tan against the dark underbrush. It was gone before my brain could even process what I'd seen, but my legs stopped on their own. Cougar. I knew it before I even admitted it to myself. The way it moved, the size, the shape of its tail. My blood ran cold. I remembered reading somewhere that if you see a cougar, it probably means it's already been watching you for a while. And if it's showing itself, it might be testing how you react. I stood there frozen, heart racing, eyes darting side to side. Everything in me screamed to run, but I didn't. I knew better. You run, you trigger their chase instinct. You are prey. So I started backing up slowly. Every step I took felt like it echoed off the trees. I didn't see it again on the way back to camp, but I didn't stop scanning. My hands were shaking when I stepped back into the firelight. The others were laughing, still drinking, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I didn't tell them right away. I just kept it to myself, trying to convince myself it had been something else. Maybe a deer, maybe a trick of the light, but I knew what I saw. Later that night, we turned in. I had my hammock strung up between two pines with a tarp overhead. I lay there in my sleeping bag, staring out into the trees, my headlamp clipped to the ridge line above me, just in case. I kept thinking about the cougar, wondering if it had seen our fire, if it was still nearby, if it would come back. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke to a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't loud, just a rustle, a shuffle, something moving in the dirt nearby. I held my breath, ears straining. Then another noise, a branch creaking, a low crunch of pine needles. Closer now. I reached slowly for my headlamp and switched it on. A weak beam of white light cut through the tarp flap and into the trees. Nothing. I scanned side to side, but everything was still. My breath was shallow, and I could feel the cold sweat between my shoulder blades. Then I saw the eyes, two faint glints, just outside the edge of the light, low to the ground, still, watching. My heart almost stopped. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just stared. I couldn't see the shape, just those two pinpricks of reflected light hovering in the darkness. It felt like a minute passed, maybe more, before they finally disappeared, just like that. Gone. I sat up, trembling, listening so hard it hurt. Then I heard something that haunts me even now. A low, deep exhale. Not human, not wind. A sound like breath passing through a throat bigger than it should be. The forest went still again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the sun finally rose, I climbed out of the hammock, legs sore from being locked tight for hours. The ground was soft with dew, the fog still hanging in the trees. I walked slowly, methodically, searching the area where I'd seen the eyes. And there they were, tracks, big ones, cat-like, for toes, no claws. The shape was clear in the damp earth, about 20 feet from my hammock. They came in from the tree line and circled once, just once, then vanished back into the brush. I called the others over and showed them. That's when it hit them. This wasn't some joke or exaggeration. Something had been out there, something big, something with teeth. We packed up fast. No one spoke much. We all kept looking over our shoulders, half expecting to see it standing there on the ridge, watching us. We cut our trip short and hiked back to the trailhead in silence. Every snapped twig or rustling branch made my heart hammer in my chest. Back at the car, I finally let myself breathe. I reported the sighting to a ranger station on the way back through town. The ranger didn't seem surprised. Said there'd been a few recent reports in that area. No attacks, but enough sightings that they were telling people to hike in groups, keep dogs leashed, and avoid camping alone. It's been years since then, but I still think about that night. Back home in Australia, people joke about deadly animals all the time. Snakes, crocs, spiders, jellyfish. But none of them think. None of them watch. That cougar, it didn't attack. It didn't roar or growl. It just watched, quiet, calculating, like it was waiting to see what I would do. And that scares me more than any spider ever could. I never saw it again, but I dream about those eyes sometimes. That slow exhale. The idea that something could come so close without a sound, size of a grown man, and I'd have no idea until it wanted me to. That's what I took back with me. Not a bite or a scar, just a knowing. Out there in the woods, you're not always the one doing the watching. Sometimes you're the one being watched, and sometimes you never even know it. I go hiking a lot, always have. There's a comfort to being surrounded by trees, by the sound of wind working through the canopy, the smell of earth and pine, and the occasional animal musk carried on the breeze. I live in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, a place where the woods seem to creep into everything. Yards, alleys, parking lots. It's like no matter where you go, you're never more than a few minutes away from the tree line. There's a sprawling forest just beyond the edge of town that most people ignore. No name for it, not officially anyway. No maintained trails, no markers, just dirt paths beaten down by time and the occasional ATV. I've been walking out there since I was a teenager. It's one of those places where the deeper you go, the more it feels like the modern world slips away. I usually head out in the evenings, but sometimes I keep going so late I get to watch the sunrise from a ridgeline or a clearing. It's peaceful even when it's dark, especially when it's dark. Or at least it always felt that way. The night this happened, I started later than usual. I'd worked a longer shift than expected, and by the time I got home, packed a snack, filled my water, and headed out, it was pushing 11 p.m. No moon, just a thin cloud cover that made everything feel a little dull and gray. I brought my headlamp, of course, but I try not to use it unless I need to. Your eyes adjust to the dark if you give them a few minutes, and the woods glow in their own way at night. I took a trail I knew well. It curves around a ravine and eventually rises up to a granite outcrop with a view over the entire valley. If you hit it at the right time, you can watch the sun come up over the hills, the mist lifting off the trees like smoke. I'd done it a dozen times before and expected it to be like any of those trips. A long, quiet walk, maybe spot a few deer, raccoons, even the occasional porcupine if I was lucky. I wasn't even halfway to the ridge when I saw it. It started with the glow, not firelight at first, more like the orange hue of old street lamps bouncing off the trees in the distance. It was faint, barely there. I assumed it was someone camping, maybe kids from town who thought it'd be fun to drink out in the woods. Nothing new. But as I got closer, I started noticing details that didn't fit. For one, the light wasn't flickering like you'd expect from a regular campfire. It was steady, constant, like a lantern or a covered flame, and it was brighter than anything I'd seen in the woods before. Too bright. It lit up the trees from underneath in an unnatural way. The second thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. The forest at night isn't silent, not really. There's always something. Crickets, wind through the branches, the distant rustle of some animal moving through the underbrush. But here, it was dead still. I slowed down. My boots made almost no sound on the pine needle-covered path. Every step felt like it echoed. I crested a small hill and there it was. A shanty town, for lack of a better word. Deep in the woods, hours away from the nearest road. It looked like it had been stitched together by desperate hands in a hurry. Scrap metal, blue tarps, bed sheets tied between trees to form crude walls. Half of it was sagging in on itself. There were rusted shopping carts, milk crates, and what looked like old furniture dragged through the bush. A half-burned mattress, a child's toy missing its head, and in the middle of it all, a fire burning in an old tire. Not a regular fire pit, just an actual tire partially melted, flames licking up through its center, eating something beneath it. The smell hit me then. Plastic, rubber, something else, sour and burnt like spoiled meat. It curled in my nose and settled in the back of my throat. The whole thing looked like it could house a dozen people, maybe more. It was large, too large for how deep into the woods it was. I couldn't understand how it had gotten there. I had hiked this trail 2 nights earlier. There was nothing here then. Nothing. No signs of construction, no noise, no evidence anyone had been building anything. And yet here it was, like it had grown up out of the earth itself. But that wasn't the weirdest part. There was no one there, not a single soul. Clothes hung from makeshift lines, swaying in the still air. Pots and pans sat near the tire fire, some of them blackened and crusted over. A cheap radio lay face down on the dirt with its battery panel missing. There was even food, half-eaten cans of beans, stale bread, a jug of water tipped on its side. All of it fresh, used, alive in a way, but there was no movement, no breathing, nothing but that low burning tire fire crackling in the center of the camp. I stood there for a long time, frozen at the edge of the clearing, trying to listen for footsteps, whispers, anything. I thought maybe I was being watched. It was that feeling like a wire pulled tight inside you. My heart wasn't pounding. Not yet, but my whole body was stiff, every nerve ready to bolt. After a while, I started inching forward. Curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see more. Maybe someone was in trouble. Maybe they'd gone out into the woods to find help. Maybe they were sleeping, tucked into one of the hovels. But I knew that wasn't right. I could feel it. The shacks were too quiet. No shifting, no breathing. I moved around one of them and peeked inside. Blankets bunched up on a bed of pine needles. A pillow made out of a rolled-up jacket. An empty liquor bottle on its side. No people. The next one was the same. A third had some clothes folded neatly on a milk crate, and a pack of cigarettes with 3 missing. No footprints around the fire. No trails leading off into the brush. No drag marks. Just nothing. It looked like they'd all stood up at once and vanished. And yet that fire still burned. I backed away. Something about the place made my skin crawl. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't ghosts or demons or anything stupid like that. It just didn't make sense. Human beings had been here, had lived here, and left everything behind like they were planning to come back within minutes, but hadn't. And no one builds a camp like this overnight. Not way out here. I pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I took a few pictures, blurry, low-light shots that wouldn't mean anything to anyone. I debated putting the fire out, but I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to disturb anything. I started backing away and then turned around and walked. Not fast, not running, just walking, steady and controlled, until I crested the next ridge and the camp dipped out of sight behind the trees. Only then did I start moving quicker. I didn't stop again until I hit the outskirts of town. By then, the sun had started to rise, that blue-gray light flooding the world and making everything feel a little less sharp. But my hands were still shaking. My clothes smelled like burnt plastic and wet wood. I couldn't get the stink out of my nose. Later that day, I drove back out there with a friend. I didn't tell him the whole story, just that I'd seen something weird and wanted to show him. We parked at the same pull-off, hiked the same trail. There was nothing there. No shacks, no tarps, no fire pit, not even a scorch mark from where the tire had burned. The ground looked undisturbed, like it hadn't been touched in years. The grass in that clearing stood tall and straight. The trees were unmarked. No footprints, no garbage, no smell. It was like the whole place had been a mirage, a hallucination. But I still had the photos. And when I showed them to my friend, his brow furrowed, and he just said it looked like a homeless camp somewhere downtown. Not like something you'd find in the middle of the forest. That was almost a year ago. I haven't hiked that trail since. I still go into the woods, but I stick to the more familiar paths now, the ones that stay closer to the edge of town. Every once in a while, I catch myself looking for light through the trees when I walk at night, that dull orange glow. I don't know what I saw out there. I don't know who built it or why they left or how it disappeared so fast. But I know it was real. The fire was warm. The air stank. The rust on the scrap metal was old. And somewhere out there, I think someone built that place in a hurry. And then they ran. I don't want to be there when they come back. I spend a lot of time hiking alone. Always have. I live in a small town nestled between forested hills. The kind of place that gets quiet by 9 p.m. and where everyone knows each other's license plates. The woods start right at the edge of town. No gates or fences. just a thin line where backyards turn into tree trunks and trailheads. I've always liked that. There's something honest about the woods. No traffic, no fake smiles, no noise except the wind and whatever's moving out there. I hike to clear my head, usually in the late afternoons after work, sometimes later. I like being out there as the sun goes down. There's a moment around twilight where the trees get darker but the sky stays light, and everything turns blue. It feels like the world's holding its breath. One evening, about a year ago, I went out a little later than usual. It was early fall, maybe late September. The days were still long enough to hike past 7 p.m., but it cooled off fast after sundown. I had a route I liked, an old logging trail that switchbacked up into the hills before cutting across a ridgeline with views of the valley. It's not maintained anymore, and you wouldn't find it on any map unless you really knew what to look for. I'd been walking it for years and hadn't run into anyone up there in a long time. Just deer, grouse, the occasional black bear far in the distance. This time, though, something felt different. It started about halfway up the trail. I noticed small things at first. Branches broken lower than they should be, footprints in the dirt that didn't look like mine, bits of plastic or fabric snagged on bushes where I'd never seen trash before. Nothing too alarming, just signs that someone else had been through recently. Probably other hikers, I figured, or maybe kids. But I hadn't seen anyone parked at the pull-off where I usually leave my truck, and I hadn't heard any voices on the way up. The further I climbed, the more out-of-place things started to feel. There was a crushed can of beans lying just off the trail, not old and rusted, but fresh, shiny, like it had been opened that day. A bit farther on, I found a torn backpack half covered in pine needles, like someone had tried to hide it and didn't do a great job. The zipper was broken. A dirty t-shirt was shoved inside along with an empty bottle of ibuprofen and a half-used roll of duct tape. It felt like I was walking into a space that wasn't mine. About 10 minutes from the top, the path veers left and skirts around a thick cluster of brush. That's where I first smelled smoke. Not forest fire smoke. More like the slow, steady kind you get from damp wood burning. Not strong, but sharp enough to catch. I figured someone must have built a fire somewhere nearby. Illegal, sure, but not unheard of. It was getting colder at night, and not everyone cares about fire bans. Still, I kept going. I wanted to get to the ridge, take a look at the sunset before heading back. The smoke smell got stronger the higher I went, and I started picking up other scents, garbage, maybe, or old food. Rotting vegetables. It was subtle, but it made my stomach tighten. Then I saw it. The ridge flattened out into a wide shelf maybe 200 feet across, ringed with big boulders and low trees. That's where I found the camp. Not a tent or two, an actual camp. It looked thrown together in a rush, but it had clearly been lived in. There were 3 or 4 makeshift shelters, mostly tarps and scrap wood leaned up against trees, held down with bricks and rope. A fire burned low in a ring of rocks. Smoke curled through the branches and out over the edge of the ridge. Pots and pans were scattered around a blackened grill plate. A few duffel bags and plastic storage bins were stacked near one of the shelters, covered by a tarp weighed down with old shoes and a broken broom handle. There were signs of people everywhere. Footprints, clothes, wrappers, cigarette butts, even a razor tucked into a tin can filled with rainwater. But no people. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just trying to make sense of it. I didn't want to move too fast. I didn't know if someone was sleeping in one of those shelters or if they'd left for a bit and planned to come back soon. I called out. Not words, just a loud throat-clearing sound, to give anyone nearby a heads up that I was there. Nothing. No rustling, no movement. That's when I realized the fire was still warm. Someone had fed it recently, probably within the hour. But the woods around me were dead silent. Even the birds were gone. I walked a slow loop around the camp, not going too close, just enough to look. One of the shelters had a small mattress inside, damp and sagging, and next to it, a notebook. I didn't open it. Something about touching anything there felt wrong. Another shelter had what looked like a kid's drawing thumbtack to a tree, but the lines were smeared by water, just bright colors bleeding into one another now. Red and blue, maybe a house. There was food too. Not a lot, but enough to show someone had been living up here for more than a night. A bag of rice, a torn box of instant oatmeal packets, a few cans, some of them unopened. A folding knife lay on a plastic plate next to an opened can of beans. The knife blade had food still stuck to it. No one in their right mind would just walk off and leave that behind. That's when it clicked. They didn't leave because they wanted to. They were still around. I was the outsider here. I started backing out the way I came in. Slow, deliberate, no sudden moves. My ears were straining for any sound. Footsteps, branches cracking, even breathing. Nothing. But I knew, deep in my gut, that I was being watched. It's a hard thing to explain. Not fear exactly, more like awareness. Like when you know someone's looking at you from behind. That sharp pressure just under the skin. I didn't look behind me. I didn't want to see anything I couldn't explain. I just walked, one step at a time, until the camp disappeared behind the curve of the ridge and I was back under the trees. I didn't run. I didn't even speed up. I just walked the whole trail back to my truck, one foot after the other, trying to keep my heart from pounding too loud. The wind picked up a little and that helped, gave the forest back some sound. By the time I saw the shimmer of my truck's windshield through the trees, my hands were freezing. I hadn't realized I stopped swinging my arms or that my fists were clenched so tight. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone. I don't know why. Maybe it felt like I'd stepped into someone else's life and I didn't have the right to talk about it. I knew what I saw was real, and I knew those people, whoever they were living out there quietly, probably because they had nowhere else to go. And when they heard me coming, they'd slipped into the woods to hide. The next day, I drove to the ranger station on the far end of town. I didn't file a report or give my name. I just asked if they knew anything about people camping illegally in the hills. The ranger gave me a tired look and said it happens sometimes. Usually homeless folks trying to stay out of sight. They don't want trouble, he said. They just want to be left alone. I haven't gone back to that ridge since. I still hike, but I stick to the lower trails now, the ones with signs and the occasional jogger or dog walker. I carry a flashlight, even in the daytime, and I always keep track of how far I've gone. Because here's the thing. That camp was too well built, too lived in to be temporary. Someone had spent time out there. They had a system, and when I walked in, they disappeared without a trace. Silent, coordinated, practiced. That's not something you can do unless you've done it before, unless you're ready for it. And it makes me wonder how many other places like that exist, hidden just out of sight. Camps buried in the woods, invisible unless you stumble right into them. Places where people live in the cracks of the world, moving like shadows, watching from the trees. And if I hadn't turned around when I did, if I'd stayed just a little longer, I might have met them. I still think about that notebook sometimes, the one sitting next to the mattress. I wonder what was written inside.